Hello and welcome. Today I want to share an experience I had recently that led me to an important realization, one that I think may apply not just to me but to many of us. Not long ago, I sent an email to someone I care about deeply. Later, when I reread what I had written, I thought, oh no, I could have hurt her feelings and possibly damaged her trust in me. So I quickly wrote again to explain that I was concerned that I might have hurt her and that I felt bad about it. She kindly replied that she wasn't hurt. She understood the mistake I had made and that I shouldn't feel shame about it. I was pleased that she hadn't been hurt, but also not wanting to be let so easily off the hook, so to speak. It was understandable to me if she had felt hurt, and I wanted her to be able to tell me about it if she needed to. Her use of the word shame stuck with me. Was that what I was feeling? At first I thought, yeah, maybe. I could go there. But the more I reflected, the more I felt it wasn't fundamentally shame, or it didn't need to be. Shame says, I'm bad. That's not where my thoughts were going. It didn't feel like shame. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm feeling guilt. Guilt says I did something wrong. Well, yes, I did something I regretted. But even guilt didn't seem like the right word. Guilt was more accurate than shame, but still not quite right. As I continued to sit with the feeling, I noticed something deeper. My bad feeling was less about some negative self-evaluation of my moral worth or my behavior, and more about her. My feelings were arising from my care for her and for our relationship. A better word for what I was feeling, I think, is remorse. It wasn't about me. It was about my care for her and our relationship. The realization felt like an epiphany. We often think of bad feelings as problems to get rid of. Shame, guilt, remorse, they all feel uncomfortable, painful, or sometimes even wretched. Excuse the sound of rain. I can't stop it. Continue. I felt that discomfort. But as I stayed with it, I discovered something at the heart of it. There was a sweetness at the core of that bad feeling. It wasn't evidence of me being bad. It was evidence of something good within me, my capacity to care. As uncomfortable as that feeling was, I was not eager to be rid of it. This made me think of grief. When we lose someone we love, the pain of grief is in direct proportion to the love we felt for that person. And most of us, despite our tears and anguish, wouldn't wish away our grief, because to erase the grief would be to erase the love. In a similar way, remorse can be seen as a kind of mini grief. The pang we feel when we hurt someone we love can be the measure of our care for that person. Interestingly, the more I recognized where my feelings were coming from, the more quickly they resolved. Not by denying, fixing, or getting past them, but by owning and valuing them. I didn't perpetuate them by persistent negative self-evaluations, nor by trying to make myself feel better. They served their purpose and then dissolved. Now, I can imagine some of you hearing this and thinking, come on, wasn't that still about you? Weren't you just afraid of looking bad or of losing the relationship? And I get that. It's always possible to frame things in self-centered terms. But that reductionism works both ways. If all caring can be explained away as selfishness, then even selfishness can be reframed as serving others. The ambitious entrepreneur who seems self-absorbed may also be supporting a family and creating jobs. My point is that human motives are richer than a single explanation. And in this case, what I felt wasn't just concern about myself. It was more importantly, for me, a genuine feeling of care for the other. And I believe we all have this potential. Some people insist that all human behavior is ultimately self-interested, that even when we seem to care for others, we're really just protecting ourselves. It can sound like the more honest and hard-nosed view, but it isn't borne out by what we know from evolutionary psychology or from our own lived experience. Human survival has always depended not only on individual strength, but on cooperation, trust, and care. The fittest are not the most ruthless, but those who can bond, repair, and belong. To reduce everything to self-interest is not realism, it's reductionism, and it misses half of the story. To understand why shame and remorse feel so powerful, it helps to step back and look at their roots. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that shame has deep roots in our social survival. In many animals, especially primates, you can see early versions of it, submissive or appeasement displays like lowered gaze, crouching, or grooming after breaking a social rule. These behaviors help prevent exclusion or aggression and keep the group together. We can't know for certain what other primates feel internally, but we can reasonably speculate that it's similar to what we feel, kind of proto-shame, a bad feeling, without all the self-referential thinking. Humans inherited and elaborated on this system. What began as outward submission in response to group disapproval became an inward self-conscious emotion, an internal voice that warns us when we risk losing status or connection. In this way, shame functions as both a personal defense mechanism and a kind of social glue, aligning the survival of the individual with the cohesion of the group. In other animals, this proto-shame is immediate and embodied, submissive postures, appeasement displays, reconciliation gestures. These responses are short-lived and tied to the here and now. In humans, though, our capacity for abstract thought and self-consciousness transformed this system. We can imagine how others see us even when they're not present, anticipate disapproval before it happens, and ruminate on past mistakes. What once served as a brief nudge back toward pro-social behavior can metastasize into self-condemnation, chronic rumination, or even be weaponized by others. The very cognitive abilities that make us uniquely human also give shame countless ways that it can go wrong. Abstract thinking is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows us to internalize shared moral codes, imagine scenarios beyond the immediate moment, and align ourselves with deeper principles, all of which are adaptive. On the other hand, it lets us reify those codes, turning living principles into rigid rules. And when that happens, we can get trapped in hypervigilant self-monitoring, measuring ourselves against absolute standards, condemning ourselves for every breach, and becoming preoccupied with how we appear rather than how we connect. That's where shame goes wrong. The very capacity for abstraction that allows for moral life can also hijack our attention, pulling it inward towards self-consciousness and away from the other and the relationship. When shame metastasizes, it becomes emotionally and socially crippling. Instead of being a brief nudge back toward the group, it can settle in as a constant undertow. Psychologists have found strong links between chronic shame and depression, anxiety, and perfectionism. People caught in its grip often ruminate endlessly, punish themselves, or deprive themselves of joy, as if making amends for simply existing. Some turn to substances or compulsive behaviors to numb the pain, only to find that shame is both the reason for and the result of their addiction. Shame also loses its way when it's provoked by unrealistic or unfair expectations, either imposed by others or internalized within us. It can arise even when we blame ourselves for things outside of our control, like illness, disability, or circumstances we never chose. In these cases, shame doesn't guide us back to pro-social behavior. It simply wounds. Socially, shame tends to isolate. Because it feels like an attack on one's very identity, we often withdraw, avoid intimacy, or hide our true selves. Some overcompensate, striving to appear perfect, strong, or superior, yet underneath remain the same raw sense of unworthiness. In relationships, shame can play strange tricks. It can make us vulnerable to those who see our weak spot and exploit it for control. Or conversely, we can sometimes use shame in a way that reverses empathy, putting the spotlight on our pain. Look how ashamed I feel. And drawing caretaking from others instead of facing their hurt and our responsibility for it. For people with strong caretaking tendencies, this can work, but others will see through it as avoidance or manipulation. At its core, metastasized shame tells us not just that we did something wrong, but that we are wrong, unworthy of love or belonging. It can paralyze agency, distort values, and disconnect us from both ourselves and others. What began as a healthy, adaptive emotion can, in the wrong conditions, become one of the most destructive forces in human life. When shame has metastasized, when it's grown beyond its original adaptive function and become a constant undertow, the first step is not to leap outward toward empathy for others. At that stage, people are usually caught in what I sometimes think of as the steel jaws of self-condemnation. Every mistake feels like proof that they are fundamentally flawed. Every imagined judgment from others is amplified until it becomes unbearable. In that state, turning immediately toward responsibility for others only deepens that collapse. This is where therapeutic work must begin, with kindness toward oneself. Here's where practices of self-compassion are essential. Kirsten Neff's research, Paul Gilbert's compassion-focused therapy, and related approaches all provide tools for loosening the grip of self-condemnation. Self-compassion isn't about excusing our behavior or denying responsibility. It's about creating a space where we can acknowledge pain without drowning in it. Acceptance and commitment therapy adds another layer. Learning to notice shame-laden thoughts without fusing with them, and instead reconnecting with our chosen values. These approaches help soften the relentless self-attack and restore enough agency and stability for the next move to be possible. But once the grip of shame begins to relax, attention can shift from condemnation of oneself, I am bad, to specific behaviors. I did something wrong. This is the realm of guilt. Healthy guilt allows us to recognize when our actions have caused harm, and it motivates us to take responsibility. Guilt is reparative rather than corrosive. It leaves intact the possibility of change. At this stage, we can begin to own our mistakes without collapsing into global self-loathing. But what I'm proposing is that there's a further step. And this is the one I rarely see described clearly in the literature. The movement from guilt to remorse. Remorse is not only about my action, it's about my care for another. It's other-oriented rather than self-oriented. It's the feeling that arises when we recognize that we may have hurt someone, and that matters to us because their well-being matters to us. This is where the sweetness at the core of the bad feeling becomes visible. The pain of remorse is not corrosive, but connective. It is the ache of love, the ember of empathy, the felt evidence that our relationships matter more than our self-image. Finally, from the experience of remorse, we're motivated toward repair. Our focus expands from self and other to the relationship itself. We feel motivated to do what is necessary to restore trust. We want to rebuild our connection. Repair as our responsibility meets empathy and love, and where deeper healing occurs. We don't want to simply be forgiven, let off the hook, and move on. We want to understand how what we did hurt another, repair the damage, learn something, and do better in the future. This doesn't happen through self-soothing alone. With it, what may have begun with potentially crippling shame and guilt can be transformed into a path to love. I know how that may sound. I try to think of a less sentimental way to say it, but I think that's the truth. So the therapeutic sequence is not simply reduce shame through self-compassion. It's more like a developmental sequence with 4 stages. The first 2 focus more on the self, and the last 2 focus more on the other and the relationship. So we can start with acknowledging shame and self-condemnation and address it with self-compassion and acceptance. Then we can move from shame to guilt, focusing on our behavior instead of self-condemnation. We can assume responsibility, making amends and bringing our actions into line with our values. From here, we can move toward remorse, which is motivated by our genuine feelings of care for another and not merely by our aspiration to be consistent and satisfied that we're living up to our values. And finally, motivated by empathy, we can do what is needed to repair our relationship with another when we have caused damage. Of course, like any other developmental model, in reality, these are not discrete sequential stages. They overlap with each other. They leap forward, they regress backward. I suggest this sequence because it seems to me that when shame is present, bypassing the earlier stages will make the latter stages less stable and may even exacerbate the feeling of shame. By the same token, emphasizing the first 2 stages and neglecting the latter 2 stages risks leaving us stuck in an inward focus. We may succeed in softening self-condemnation, but without moving into remorse and repair, we never fully reconnect with the people who matter to us, and the healing power of relationship remains untapped. Let me say it another way, because I think this is important. Each step matters. If we try to skip directly to the other or to the relationship without attending to the self and how we've been wounded internally, we risk amplifying our shame and neglecting our own needs. If we never move beyond self-compassion, we risk staying locked in a private loop of self-soothing that doesn't fully reconnect us to others. The power is in the sequence. Each step prepares the way for the next, leading us from isolation to reconnection, from shame to love. So the next time you feel that pang of shame, guilt, or remorse, pause before you try to push it away. Ask yourself, what is this feeling really pointing to? Is it condemning you? Is it guiding you to take responsibility? Or is it revealing the depth of your care for another? If we can learn to follow these feelings through their stages, rather than getting stuck or running from them, they can become guides, leading us from isolation into reconnection, and ultimately, again, from shame to love. That's all for now. If you got something out of this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Until next time, as I say at the end of all of my videos, take care of yourself and each other. I hope this video has offered you another way to think about what that means. Bye for now.